Hi, everybody. This time we're going to talk about Pluto and how it got changed from being a full-time planet into being a dwarf planet. Now, those of us who are a little bit older remember back in the day when we were kids, Pluto was one of the 9 planets. And back in 2006, Pluto was officially changed from being a planet to a dwarf planet. And at the time, oh my goodness, there was a big kerfuffle about the whole thing. There were protests, and it was a big deal in the common press and social media and things like that. So, what happened and why did it happen? Well, to understand this, you have to understand a little bit more about the anatomy of our solar system. So, about 30 to 50 astronomical units away from the sun, there is something which is referred to as the Kuiper belt because a gentleman named Kuiper hypothesized its existence many years ago. The Kuiper belt is a bagel shaped structure, and it is about 10 astronomical units thick. So it's a big thing out there, and it is full of lots of little icy bodies that are left over from the creation of the solar system. Starting at about the 2000s, with adaptive optics, there have been a lot more good quality telescopes that have been aimed into the solar system, and we have been able to see stuff out in that Kuiper belt with a clarity that mankind has never been able to see before. Well, what happened was this. Oops, before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about this Kuiper belt to give you some idea of how big it is. Using the same size scale that we've used throughout this course, if we used a scale model sun about 8 inches across, the Kuiper belt would be on that same model 147 meters away, so a football field and a half away, and it would be a 9-story high building. So it would be big. It would be a football field and a half away from where you and I stood holding our little ball, but it would be 9 stories high. So it is a big structure, and it is full of lots of these little icy bodies. And the icy bodies, most of them are dark, meaning they are not bright, shiny ice. They are covered in dust. And so they are very, very difficult to see. Well, in 2005, a gentleman named Michael Brown and his team at Caltech discovered something in the Kuiper belt, and it was eventually named Eris. When they did some data analysis on it, they discovered it was larger than Pluto. Well, then the question came, is it the next planet? Is it the next planet in our solar system past Pluto? It had a very low albedo. It's very dark, very low reflectivity. And so what are we going to do with this thing? If it is bigger than Pluto, well, it's definitely got to be included as a planet. And then there were people that said, no, there are only 9 planets. And there was a big fal-de-rah about the whole thing. Well, they named it as their pretend name when they were just getting to know it. They called it Xena and Gabrielle from the old TV show Xena Princess Warrior. Eventually, when it was officially named, they proposed the name Eris, which was the goddess of grief and strife. And then they eventually found that Eris had a little moon, a little satellite, and they suggested Dysnomia as the name for it, which was Eris's daughter, the goddess of lawlessness, and it was a tongue-in-cheek reference to Lucy Lawless, who happened to play Xena on Xena Princess Warrior. So these guys have a wacky sense of humor. For example, his book is called How I Killed Pluto and Why It Had It Coming. So, a fun group of people. So with Eris, and then they kept finding more and more and more of these trans-Neptunian objects out there. And this was a big question. What are we going to do with all this stuff that we were discovering? Astronomers said, no, we should have 9 planets. No, we've got to take Pluto out. So in 2006, there was a big meeting of the International Astronomical Union. Here is a picture from that meeting. And they realized no one had ever actually defined what a planet was. They kind of said, well, if it's a planet, you'll look at it and know it when you see it. Well, all of a sudden, they had to figure out what was a planet and what was not a planet. So they defined it. And they said the definition of a planet is 1, it orbits the sun or a star. 2, it has to have enough mass that it pulls itself into a round shape. If it doesn't have enough weight that it's all kind of lumpy and bumpy, like Ultima Thule or Arakoth, well, then it's not a planet. And thirdly, it has to be massive enough to clear its neighborhood, meaning that it is the big dog in its orbit around the sun. Now, like Jupiter, it can then accumulate lots and lots of moons, but it's got to be the big kahuna in town. So this is the definition of a planet. So by doing this, they had to figure out what do they do with things like Pluto and newly discovered Eris. And in the asteroid belt, they have known for years about Cirrus. So they decided that the rest of these things would be called dwarf planets. And dwarf planets are defined as things that orbit the sun, are round. So they're not asteroids. Asteroids are wacky shaped. These are dwarf planets. They orbit the sun, but they're not massive enough to clear their local areas. They can run around in orbiting the sun with a pack of debris around them. And there are gobs and gobs of these things in the Kuiper belt, the asteroid belt. And these are this new category of things called dwarf planets. Since that time, since the mid-2000s, there have been new measurements and, of course, New Horizons spacecraft, new measurements of the size and diameter of Pluto and Eris. And I don't remember, I think Pluto is now a little bit been measured to be a little bit wider, but Eris is heavier. So then which one is bigger? It depends on if you're going to look at diameter or mass. So that's still a little question, which of those is bigger? Michael Brown and his team, since they're spending a lot of time looking out into the Kuiper belt and trans-Neptunian objects, they found some weird things. They found a whole bunch of asteroids on weird and wacky orbits. And the only way they could end up there is if there was another really heavy object on a very strange orbit around our sun. And when they did the math, they found that this object would have a huge orbit, like 10,000 to 20,000 year orbit, and it would be heavy, like 10 times the mass of our Earth, or approximately the size of Neptune. And they have said there is another big planetary object out there. Right now, it's commonly known as Planet X. There are lots of teams that are looking for it, and the first one who finds it will get bragging rights and naming rights. And keep looking for the news feeds. I'm excited. I'm sure in the next handful of years, we are going to have somebody that's going to say, woohoo, we just found Planet X. All right, that will do for the moment. You have a good one, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.